Achewillow, Season 7, Chapter 7, Nature Unrelenting. I did what I had to do. Everyone agrees that desperate times call for desperate measures, and having exhausted all expedient possibilities, I did what the desperate always do. I turned to a higher power. In Achewillow, there are a variety of supernatural forces available. In fact, there's a veritable catalog of powers on display if you know where to look. And despite myself, I've learned about most, perhaps all of them. That I ended up trusting my fate and Olivia's life to the Pilvists is actually a very safe investment. They're quiet, easygoing, and worship the most passive entity in Achewillow. As far as I know, their religion has no baggage. In fact, until I got to their temple and saw their rituals for myself, I assumed they were more of a social club that latched on to one of the multitude of bizarre happenings as an excuse to gather. Before sitting down at their table, I'd given up on helping Olivia. There's still some work to be done before I put too much faith into the Great Cloud, but at the very least, Ian and his flock restored the most important piece of myself in these dark times. They equipped me with the one tool necessary if I'm to be of any use to my friend. Hope. After sitting down at the table, the Pilvists do not waste time on pleasantries or introductions. After all, this is Achewillow. All faces are known, and most names, and if there are any that I can't match to the other, there'll be time to rectify that later. With a nod of his chin, Ian commands the robed members on either side of me to each take a box of croissants. My gift and burden is then passed down from one set of hands to the other. Each time it exchanges owners, the box is admired, revered, and subtly smelled. When the boxes arrive in the hands of Ian and the woman across from him, a nail salon owner named Jessica, they both pop their boxes open. I expect that, as the head of the Pilvists in attendance, they'll divide and share these sacred croissants I've made amongst the flock. Then a prayer can be said and we can all have a nice breakfast treat. No more benign a cult could there be than one that revolves around food and community, right? The procedure was long and tedious, with Ian and Jessica, slow and deliberate, balancing the croissants on a single large silver platter. If the robes seem out of place, everything else, from the cutlery to the rugs, matched the house's aesthetic. Normally, I would have gotten impatient with this ritual, but I know the importance of such things. Even if there is no magic or alchemy at play, there's still power in observance of custom. It's the theory behind appetizers and where they get their name. A food, like this waiting, designed to tease with anticipation. The longer we plate and prepare, the better that first bite will taste. The next step might be to have fancy china placed before each of us. Perhaps jams and jellies will be brought out, and with luck, some refreshments. Brunch with extra steps, and my croissant on center stage. Except no one gets up, no croissants are offered, and no drinks are brought. Instead, the silver platter is set at the head of the table, like a feast for a gluttonous child that will be joining us late. A pyramid of crust and butter, 6 croissants high, waits along with the Pilvists, salivating with anticipation. It lasts for some time, and I'm ready to speak up when the very top pastry shivers and trembles. So subtle at first, I might have missed it, but in the absolute silence of the mansion, small things become hard to miss. My croissant moves, first twitching, then spinning, making that last circular motion last for a good minute, long enough for me to wonder what it is I'm looking at. A ghost is my first guess, and it paints a terrible portrait. What if the Pilvists have been worshipping the restless dead all this time? Maybe it's a previous owner of the house, struggling to comprehend their fate, tethered to their own dwelling by some unfinished business. Had someone stumbled upon the one food that appeases the spirit, thinking they were laying down offerings to a powerful entity? Or was it more tragic, and what was once a tradition, not unlike how Julia Remington eased her husband's ghost, had become ceremony for the unwitting? Except, where were all the other telltale signs of a haunting? Where were the noises and moving items? Where was the bone-deep cold the dead carried with them wherever they went? A shiver goes up my spine, but not from the sight. Something else has changed, and it takes all my willpower not to jump out of my seat. It's the table. Its texture has shifted from the polished, mirror-like surface to something that feels more of a birch bark. The skin of the tabletop seems to ripple under my touch, like flesh shivering from a cold and recoiling from winter winds. My conscious mind needs convincing, but after a moment it becomes undeniable that this massive piece of furniture is alive. I've seen ghosts toss furniture and people around. I've heard the dead wail their trauma into empty rooms, but I've never seen any of them possess the living, let alone tables. This is different. If the wooden surface is indeed possessed, it is not by the spirit of the dead. Something else animates it, something stranger and more powerful, something ancient. Next to Ian, the wood begins to unravel. The grain of the tabletop flows like a river, pooling into estuaries that soon detach themselves from the surface. As if infused with fresh life, the tabletop has begun to grow again, with branches and vines pulling themselves free. They move like the limbs of a marionette, twitching and uncertain, flailing, blind to find their quarry. One lands on Ian's elbow, growing up his arm as if he were a forgotten jungle temple. More twist themselves into living braids, buds and leaves sprouting from their tips. This is no manifestation of death as I had first surmised, but rather an expression of life. When the vines and branches finally find and land on the croissants, the crux of the ritual truly begins. Slender and delicate, the plant limbs wrap themselves around my pastries. I can hear the delicate crust breaking from across the room and see trapped steam escaping the still warm croissant as it's being ripped apart. Pieces are crushed and entwined, disappearing and becoming part of the living, growing table. Green petals soon push and pull themselves from the branches like leaves in spring. Shivering like newborn calves, they struggle and fight, eventually splitting in twain and yawning open, revealing the floral equivalent of teeth guarding pink interiors. The size of a baby's hand, they look like massive Venus flytraps. And like lazy sovereigns, they are fed bits and pieces of food directly into their gaping maws. This spectacle might have lasted 10 minutes or 10 hours before I interrupted. Beatific, Ian and Jessica have not moved from their seats, despite creeping vines wrapping themselves around larger portions of their limbs and capturing more and more of their body in the process. "Ian?" I say with a shivering voice. "Ian!" I remain ignored, and finally panic sets in and I stand, pushing my chair to the floor in a clatter. Only then do the cloud worshippers break from their trance to look at me, but where I expect to find surprise or offense at my desecration of their ritual, I find nothing more than pitied condescension, the kind of look one might give a particularly slow child who misunderstood a joke. In a panic, I try to make a run for Ian, hoping to pull him free and save him from the ravenous piece of furniture. Interior decor has gone malicious, and no one will do anything about it. In fact, my attempt to help is stifled by the hands and arms of the Pilvis that sit between Ian and I, keeping me from him. They hold me back, paralyzing me, but only for a few seconds, only long enough for the table to finish its feast. There's no remonstration from the assembled cult, no blame or even disappointment. Rather, they smile, looking up at me with warmth and understanding. The last crumb of croissant is consumed, a petal mouth closing tight on the buttery treat, and the feast is over. As fast as it began, the manifestation is done. Waves travel up the tabletop, and with each liquid tremor, the branches and vines lose more of their life. Leaves turn brown, shrivel, and fall to the ground. Growths dry up, crack, and twist, soon dissolving into little more than dirt before crumbling apart. From each flower a small fruit grows, but no sooner is it ripe than it rots and liquefies, leaving nothing but a seed. For the duration of a meal, the table has gone through the cycle of life, from a dead piece of wood to a living entity, then back to death once more, leaving behind the key to new life again. Ian shrugs off the decaying plant matter from his arm, brushing the rich soil from his white robes. Then, still ignoring my interruption, he digs through the dirt. With Jessica's help, he picks out a few dozen of these seeds, which they then distribute among the faithful. A strange twist on communion, they each eat of this flesh, not as a symbol of life eternal, but as a living example of the cycle of nature. I'm released, and those Pilvists who kept me from Ian offer a polite smile before going about the business of cleaning up the mess. Ian walks up to me, vigor and vitality expressed in a radiant smile. Gently, he takes my hand and peels open the fingers like delicate petals. He then puts one of the seeds in the palm of my hand, which he closes into a tight, strong fist. "Welcome," he says. "We're so very glad you're finally here." Annabelle seems unimpressed with my retelling. She sits there, nursing her mug of cooling coffee, staring at me. It's the annoyed curiosity of a mother trying to decide what to do with her disobedient child. Once in a while, she'll tear off a piece of brownie and bring it to her lips, but twice through my story, she put it back down. And when she does eat a bite, she chews it without enthusiasm, going through the motions like a tired automaton. I hate to see food so disrespected, especially my food, and even more so by one of my friends. "Is that it?" she asked, unimpressed. "What do you mean, is that it?" "I'm waiting for the part where it ties back to helping Olivia." Annabelle has lived in Achewillow her whole life. She's been through the summer camp they call the Wilds. She participated in and helped host the Donselites. Of anyone I've grown close to, she is one of the most quintessential area residents I could think of. The only thing that doesn't tie her to the fundamental pillars of Achewillow is that she isn't a Pilvist. Ian claims they can do miracles, and they can help Olivia. A cult leader making empty promises? Oh wow, where do I sign up? Her sarcasm sounds petty. I thought she was on board with finding an alternative way to help Olivia. In fact, when I mentioned that the front door was locked on that topic, she was the first to grab a rock and offer to break a window. The afternoon is growing old, and where some customers are picking up to head home for supper, others are walking in to get a meal. The rotation keeps me going back and forth to the kitchen, doing my best to support Stefan while he handles the cash and barista duties. Each trip to get food or a warm sandwich is another chance to ponder Annabelle's resistance. In all her years in Achewillow, she's known and befriended many of the cloud worshippers, fraternizing with members of the cult as one would a friendly neighbor. Some of her friends were Pilvists at one point. The white robes and weird customs are familiar to her. She knows this cult. But then again, she knows this cult. "I get what you're saying," I admit, using tongs to put a freshly warmed wrap on a plate for a customer. "I thought they were a sham too. That's why I went. I've never seen their rituals. I thought it was all crap," she finishes for me. I pause, trying to decide if it's the cult she's calling or me. "Right. I'm just investigating, trying to decide if they can or can't help." Annabelle's cold condescension thaws a little, but not in agreement as I would have liked. It's not a warm wind of support that melts her features, but rather the scorching breath of annoyance. She reaches out to take my hand, cupping my fingers in one palm while covering them with the other. "Miriam, they can't." I'm surprised by the amount of conviction in her words. Rare are the moments when Annabelle is so serious and calm at the same time. Usually, the former only manifests in moments of panic or terror. "They can't," she continues, "because that's not what they're about. Listen, I can't fault them for their conviction. They really believe in that great cloud of theirs, but they can't stop people from dying. Didn't you hear me about the table and the croissants?" And just like that, Henry shows up to say that Olivia's stabilized. I don't believe in coincidences. Not here. Our conversation has heated up, and some of the patrons are noticing. Stefan has been throwing us disapproving looks for a few minutes already, but now Michael has looked up from his wrap and tea while the Laytons are pointing and gossiping under their breath. "Sorry," I whisper to Annabelle. "Like I said, I'm just investigating." But my appeal to calm breaks upon her like waves onto a rocky shore. "Miriam," she says, matching my tone, "you're not investigating." Annabelle then puts a hand on the box still on the counter between her and the register. Her nails try to dig into the thin cardboard, scratching at the green ink that covers its surface. It's an unconscious act, brought up by feelings she might not even be aware of. "You're being recruited, and I'm not going to just sit around and watch it happen." Putting actions to her words, she pushes herself up from the stool, breaking eye contact for the first time this afternoon. I haven't felt this level of disappointment from someone since I told my parents I was kicked out of cooking school. Worst of all, she's leaving a half-eaten brownie on her plate. "Annabelle," I try to appeal to her, "where are you going?" "I have a few things to take care of." She takes a few steps towards the door before turning back again. "I'll see you tomorrow. Please don't sell your soul before then, and please don't wear those robes." Dirge-like, the door chimes mourn her departure. Softer and with far more reverence, I put my own hand atop the green box. It was a gift from Ian, one that I wasn't told came at any price. I'm not naive enough to be blind to the quiet invitation, but it hadn't occurred to me that there might be obligations attached to those robes. It's been a while since the last time navigating the traditions and customs of Achewillow felt like visiting a foreign country. I've also always stayed clear of religion and faith in town. They weren't my bag in Montreal, and I felt no attraction to them here. It's one thing, however, to ignore the tower bells on Sunday morning, and quite another to be confronted with a friend's mortality. I've flirted with death myself, some would say almost literally, but the question of evading the ultimate fate was never put to me. "What about you?" I turned to ask Stefan. He's been quiet, as always. It's often heartbreaking how easily he vanishes amongst the furniture. I once caught myself thinking that the coffee machine had more personality, and guilt gnawed at me for hours afterwards. Upon longer reflection, though, there's no malice in my observation. In fact, I suspect Stefan would have welcomed it. "What about me? Any thoughts on pilvists and great clouds? Quiet, pleasant," he says without hesitation. "I like them." Of course he would. "That's it? Good tippers." To that he forces a smile. The evening wears on a little longer, with a dozen customers walking in and out of the dining room. They purchase their coffees and teas, cookies and pastries. I noticed Jacob hiding in the far corner, under a photo of the great cloud that's been in the Achewillow since before I inherited the place. At one point, two white-robed figures stroll by the front window and give me a knowing nod, faces adorned with friendly smiles like a bas-relief on a church's facade. Everywhere there are signs of the benign nature of the pilvists, and I can't reconcile Annabelle's animosity towards them. Even Doris seemed to have held a place for them in her heart, honoring their god with a picture. And it's too often been suggested that I should do what Doris would. Inevitably, the last customer packs up her laptop and heads to the door. Mavis Boucher doesn't come often to the Achewillow, but when she does, it's for hours and hours, ordering a different kind of coffee every 45 minutes or so. One day she's writing a book, the other she's studying online. Tonight, she just keeps me from going to bed. Once Stefan and I have finished sweeping the floors, wiping down the tables, and putting everything into the dishwasher, it's finally time for me to climb back up to my apartment and sleep. Except even that gets interrupted. Just as I'm about to pick up my box and go, there's a scratching and a rattling, the metallic melody that heralds an uninvited guest. A sigh escapes my lungs, one heavy with the history of attempts to stop the intruders from invading my cafe. The back door creeps open a few inches, allowing in the little raccoon I've named Brioche. She's still wearing the little scarf I once made for her out of a cake box ribbon. Not the original, mind you, but one similar that I cut from the same roll I've had lying around for years. What was it Ophelia had once said? That perhaps this raccoon was my familiar, the same way that mean orange cat of hers is her familiar. I doubt it, though. I love little Brioche, and I suppose I love the rest of her family, too, to some degree, but we lack the bond needed for me to call her mine. "Where have you been?" I ask. "It's a little late to be asking for food, isn't it?" The trash bandit sits at the threshold, her little paws scratching and grabbing at each other like some nervous old woman might. But she doesn't come in. "What's wrong?" I ask, tilting my head. "It's not salt that you need, I hope." Careful, worried, I tiptoe to the door. The raccoons have always had a keen nose for demons and monsters, and while a good advanced warning system, they make poor guard dogs. Peering from afar, I see nothing outside to indicate any threat. However, even after I take a piece of brownie out from the kitchen and offer it to Brioche, she does not budge. Every few seconds or so, she'll turn around to look behind her, sometimes indifferent, other times snarling. There's a commotion outside, but nothing more than the mundane activities of animals scavenging through the trash. This is what I get for not indulging them with leftovers at the end of the day. I'm about to go gather a few things to buy their forgiveness when the relative silence is broken by a short, harrowed wail. To the unfamiliar, it sounds like a woman in distress, screaming wordlessly for help. But I've heard that sound before. It's the sound of a fox, and it seems to be coming from just down the stairs outside. I grab a broom to shoo away the intruder and make it leave my raccoons alone, but I'm reminded of Patience's words. You shouldn't play with dead things. I'm not doing this again. Surrounded by raccoons and a fox, alone in my back alley with a brownie in one hand and a broom in the other, I've seldom looked or felt more insane. That I appear to be talking to myself only adds to the already sad tableau. There are moments in one's life that feel big despite being so very small. It's easy to look back on these instances and notice them for the hinge on the door that they are, small parts of a much bigger apparatus that are necessary for the path to open. That night I opened an envelope from one Helen Edna, notary public, sent me on the path I still travel to this day, forever changing the trajectory of my life. It's far more difficult to see the hinges while traveling through the threshold. They blur in the movement, hide in the door frame, and disappear into the door as it closes behind you. I've been walking through one of these thresholds recently. Asserting myself against Ophelia was barely a nibble of this change. Testing the waters with the tip of my toe and seeing if they're inviting. I couldn't stand up to my rival on my own, so I sent people who could. This week, I declared war on death itself, and with those efforts evaporating like steam from a bain-marie, I again turned to outside forces. I shouldn't play with dead things. Come here, I say, sitting on the ball of my feet and extending my hand towards the fox. Held between my fingers, the buttery square of a perfectly baked brownie waits to be taken. Salivating raccoons turn their heads, tempted by the offering, but either they recognize it isn't for them, or the fox holds a higher priority at the moment. Come on, I tease. Come see me, just for a moment. Roberts, the fat raccoon with the prosthetic leg, starts hobbling towards me, his jaw open in anticipation of a delicious treat. He looks a little wounded when I shoo him away, and it does crack my heart a little to see him like that. But I know he'll be fine, and I'll make it up to him. To all of them. For now, it's the fox I want. The stubborn creature is having none of it, though, which I suppose makes sense. While the dead respond to food with as much hunger as the living, they're fed by nostalgia, not calories. It's the memory of their living selves they chew and swallow. If the fox is indeed a dead thing, I suspect even a delectable specimen such as this will hold little interest. Stupid animal cocks its head, twisting its brow as if to tell me I'm the dumb one for even trying. When it turns to walk away, I declare the matter concluded. I stand and I watch, the sly creature taking a few steps towards the forest, only to stop at the very edge of the porch light. There, on the threshold of darkness, between nature and civilization, it turns around again to look at me. I told you, buddy, I'm not doing this again. This time it's my turn to show my back and walk to my own threshold. Except I don't make a drama queen of myself by looking back. Dead or not, the fox is getting no further attention from me. It's one ghost that will have to wait to be freed. The broom is set aside as I go through my daily leftovers, attempting a quick triage of cold wraps, cookies, and perhaps even pastries that threaten to go stale. A modest selection in hand, I walk back to the alleyway, glad to see the fox has gone off into the woods and my raccoons can be fed in peace. Instead of dumping the treats into the dumpster to let them fight over a meal, I distribute each cookie, brownie, sandwich, and wrap myself. Roberts and Crimson are quick to accept their share. The two I've yet to name also don't wait, eager to feast on a free meal. It's when I come to the Dawn that things get a little more complicated. He's a clever one for a raccoon. Usually eager to steal whatever morsel I might present to him, he's also the one who'll be most thoughtful and wary, smelling the air for threats and reading humans to see which are worthy of his trust. This is how he defends his family. Leadership, however, doesn't tip the balance when weighed against a butter chicken wrap. In the end, it's little Brioche who stands firm. Even when presented with her favorite dessert, her namesake, she barely acknowledges the food. "Listen," I explained, scratching behind her ears. "Unless you learn to order off the menu and tell me what you'd rather eat, I'm going to bed. If you can learn English overnight, we can revisit this conversation in the morning, okay?" Obviously, the little scamp doesn't get the message, shrugging away my hand and twisting away from me. She even manages to knock the pastry down from the dumpster and into the filthy puddle at my feet. Aw, come on. I crouch down to pick up the brioche, but of course it's too late. Baked goods are like sponges, and before I could even react, the pastry had drunk 3 times its weight in liquid sludge. Pinching it by the corner between thumb and index, my brioche's delicious treat falls apart as I lift it. With a grunt, I pull myself back up to look at the frustrated raccoon at eye level. Sometimes when it's dark enough, or the rubbish bears are agitated enough, I can see a pure cobalt glow from deep behind their eyes. Tonight is no exception, and looking into Brioche's big black pupils, I see the blue light within. If you've ever watched a documentary on nuclear reactors, you've seen that very same color. They call it Kasparov. No, that's not right. Cherenkov radiation. I remember reading a very thorough explanation of how it's produced, and it was fascinating, but in that kind of way you immediately forget. I doubt there's radiation bouncing around the back of my raccoon's eyes, but both phenomena have a similar eeriness to them. Beautiful, but also a reminder of great forces at play. I'll get you something else, I promise. But I think that was my last brioche, Brioche. Still can't tell me what you'd prefer? Something savory, perhaps? Still no English, but more of the skittish behavior. This time she tosses in a low growl for good measure. Has Brioche ever growled? Even the Don perks up at the sound, his heavy lids squinting in his version of a frown. The other raccoons turn their heads, all looking at angry little Brioche. What is it? I want to ask, but the hair on my arms and the back of my neck stands on end as I realize. The whole world falls apart around me. The brick walls and cement stairs crumble and vanish into the void. The asphalt in filthy puddles crack and split, tumbling into the abyss. Even sound is swallowed by the sudden darkness. All that remains in this realm of panic are the dumpsters, the raccoons, and me. The only sounds are my heartbeat and an angry raccoon. This has happened before, a refuse bandit warning me of impending danger. I have a raccoon scar on my arm as a reminder of that night the Dawn saved my life by keeping me inside of a salt circle. I wasn't familiar with demons back then. I didn't understand my peril. Tonight, I feel like I might have come full circle. In my growing arrogance, I've gotten used to monsters and demons and ghosts. Too familiar is what I've become, and with familiarity comes carelessness. I turn around slowly, my vision still swallowed up by the void. At any second, I expect to be stabbed by sharp claws or bitten by razor-sharp teeth. A demon of wrath might close its jaws around my calf, dragging me into the woods to be devoured. A hunger demon could get its hands on me, tearing open my abdomen to pull out my stomach and viscera, stuffing them into its own body. Or maybe it will be something new, something I've never seen before that will claim me before I even have a chance to identify the threat. Nothing. The world comes back, reconstructed from the broken pieces. The alley is empty, the edge of the forest deserted. There is no stench of burning meat, and the only decay I smell is from the dumpsters. But my heart still beats. False alarm, I say, wondering if I shouldn't get a box of salt, just in case. Little rascal. I try to rub Brioche's head, a gesture meant more to comfort myself than anything else. Again, she's having none of it. Growling, she pushes and claws at my hand. When she decides that I'm not pulling my fingers away fast enough, she bites down. Ow! What the hell? There's a moment of confusion during which I can't believe that my favorite raccoon bit me. I look at the wound, pinpricks in my skin oozing timid drops of blood, and then at Brioche, making sure I tried to pet the right raccoon. In return, she offers me an apologetic look. Big round eyes as surprised as I am. It's anthropomorphizing her behavior to think her contrite, but then again, she is the best lockpick in town, and all 6 of the garbage critters are unusually smart. I don't dare suck at the wound as I might a cut from a kitchen knife or a scrape from a cheese grater. The raccoons keep themselves clean, but I don't presume to know what's been in those mouths recently. I take a step back and decide that maybe I've had enough suburban wildlife for one evening. I'll bring her a big breakfast tomorrow, but for now, I need to get this cleaned up and drag myself to bed. Oh, no, you don't. I step into the Achewillow, pushing Brioche away before she can follow me in. Hungry or apologetic, it doesn't matter. We can make up and be friends over fresh croissants. Closing the door, I can hear her little claws scratching at the metal door, frantic to get in after me. The heartbreaking plea is just about to get the better of me as I think about which treat to give Brioche to buy her forgiveness when I notice it. Sitting there on the dining room floor, right next to the counter, it waits. The so-called dead thing. The fox. Achewillow is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Achewillow to donate. Achewillow has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Achewillow for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Achewillow.